My sister Sierra always claimed she'd be the cool mom, constantly saying her kids would be her best friends, not like those uptight parents. So when Eli was born, I expected her to be completely devoted, and for a while she was. She bought new storybooks, took countless pictures, and spent hours memorizing dinosaur names. But on his fourth birthday, Sierra gave him the worst gift imaginable. She abandoned him. I'll never forget her tearful call, saying she just wanted to drop him off at the fire station and let the universe deal with him. Instead of scolding her, I offered to babysit more often. Sierra was a single mom, just emerging from postpartum depression, and I believed that with my help, everything would be okay. For a while, it seemed to work. I started with 1 weekend a month, then once a week, then almost every evening. Eli became the son I never had. Last month, Sierra asked me to watch Eli while she went to Vegas for a bachelorette party. The catch? My husband, Caleb, and I had planned our honeymoon for that exact time. We'd been married 2 years, saving every penny, and I'd given Sierra 4 months' notice. So I said no. To my surprise, she didn't seem mad, just laughed it off, admitting her mistake and saying she'd find someone else. I should have known Sierra would never admit fault so easily. At 3 a.m., my phone vibrated furiously. It was Sierra. I answered immediately. She was sobbing, incoherent, muttering that Eli was hurt and I needed to come back. Eli was hit by a drunk driver, she choked out. They had to airlift him for open brain surgery at the children's hospital. That's all I needed to hear. We packed in a blur of tears, begged airlines for emergency seats, and watched $8,000 in non-refundable bookings vanish. On the flight, Sierra ghosted me, no texts, no calls. As soon as Caleb and I landed at JFK, I called the children's hospital. The nurse said they had no pediatric trauma patients by that name. Adrenaline surged through me. We called 6 more hospitals, but Sierra's phone went straight to voicemail. We did the only responsible thing we could think of. We broke into her home using the spare key under the mat. The door was unlocked. I expected to see Eli in bed with Sierra beside him, but instead we found him on the couch, playing on his tablet, surrounded by empty cereal bowls, completely unharmed. "Yay, Aunt Claire!" "Uncle Caleb!" he cheered, wrapping his arms around my waist. I gently pulled him away. "Where's your mommy, sweetie?" He looked up innocently. "She left 3 days ago. She said she couldn't afford a babysitter, but you'd be back from your vacation soon to take care of me." Caleb, still trying to process it all, asked, "So you didn't get into any accidents or injuries?" Eli beamed. "Why would I be hurt? I can take care of myself." My blood ran cold. I used Sierra's landline to call her. This time she picked up, the blaring song, "California Girls," in the background. "Hey, what's up?" she slurred. "What the F*** is going on, Sierra?" I demanded. "What do you mean?" she asked, playing dumb. "You told me Eli was in surgery." Sierra cackled like a witch. "Haha. I knew if I lied, you'd come back. You were being super extra about your honeymoon. Must be nice having money to throw around while single moms struggle." Behind me, Eli asked in a small voice if he could live with us, saying Mom didn't want him anymore. Sierra must have overheard because her tone instantly turned venomous. She accused me of turning her son against her, claiming this had been my plan all along. That's when it finally hit me. Sierra wasn't a misunderstood single mother. She was an irresponsible, self-absorbed sociopath, and I was ready to make her pay. I hung up on her mid-rant, my hands trembling. Caleb was already in the kitchen making Eli a proper meal. The poor kid had been living on cereal for 3 days.
3
whole days, alone. He was only 4 years old. I sat next to Eli, keeping my voice calm. "Were you scared?" He shrugged. "Mommy told me I was a big boy, and she'd done it before when I was busy." My stomach dropped. This wasn't the first time. I immediately called Child Protective Services. The woman on the other end sounded tired, like she'd heard it all before. She took down the information, saying someone would come by tomorrow. Tomorrow isn't good enough. I pleaded, explaining a 4-year-old had been abandoned for 3 days. She said since he had food and shelter, it had to go through proper channels, but assured me they'd prioritize the case. I wanted to scream. Eli devoured the mac and cheese Caleb made, eating like he hadn't seen real food in days. Between bites, he recounted how he'd been too scared to go outside, how he'd run out of milk on day 2, and how he tried calling me but didn't know my number by heart. Each detail fueled my anger. After dinner, we bathed him and put him in our guest room. He fell asleep clutching my hand. Caleb and I stayed up all night discussing our options. We couldn't leave him with Sierra, but we couldn't legally take him either. We were stuck. The next morning, a social worker named Ramona arrived. She was about 50, wearing a wrinkled blazer and carrying a clipboard. She gently interviewed Eli, asking about his time alone. He told her everything, just as he'd told us. She took notes and photos of the empty fridge and the mess. Then she pulled me aside. She said they'd open a case but warned me these things take time. Sierra would get a chance to explain herself. The system favored keeping families together. I told her that was bullshit. She just shrugged. That's how it works. 2 days passed. Eli stayed with us, and we fell into a routine. Breakfast, cartoons, lunch at the park, afternoon nap, dinner, bath, bed. It felt natural. Caleb was amazing with him, reading stories and teaching him card games. On the 3rd day, Sierra showed up at our door. She looked like hell, greasy hair, smeared makeup, reeking of alcohol and cigarettes. She demanded Eli back immediately. I stood in the doorway and told her no. She tried to push past me, but Caleb stepped up behind me. Sierra started screaming about her rights as a mother, accusing us of kidnapping her son. Neighbors came out to watch. I calmly told her to leave or I'd call the cops. She laughed. Go ahead. She said she'd already called them herself. 10 minutes later, a patrol car pulled up. 2 officers got out looking bored. Sierra ran up to them, crying, saying we'd stolen her baby. The officers separated us. I explained everything, the abandonment, the lies about the accident, the 3 days he was alone. I showed them my phone records, the calls to hospitals. They nodded and took notes. Then they went inside to talk to Eli. He was coloring at the kitchen table. When they asked if he wanted to go home with Mommy, he shook his head hard. He said he wanted to stay with Aunt Claire and Uncle Caleb. He said Mommy left him alone and he was scared. The officers exchanged looks. They came back outside and told Sierra she needed to leave. They said this was a civil matter now, not criminal, and told her to work it out with Child Protective Services. She completely lost it, screaming that I'd brainwashed him, that I'd always been jealous of her because I couldn't have kids, so I was stealing hers. The officers warned her to calm down, but she didn't. They ended up putting her in the back of the patrol car to cool off. Before they drove away, one officer pulled me aside. He told me to document everything, take pictures, save texts, record calls if legal in our state. He said I'd need it. I knew then this was just the beginning. Sierra wasn't going to give up easily. She'd rather destroy everything than admit she was wrong. But I looked back at Eli, peacefully coloring at our table, and knew I'd fight. He deserved better than her. He deserved a real family, and I was going to make sure he got one.
The next
morning, I woke up to 27 missed calls, all from Sierra. My phone screen glowed accusingly in the dim light, each notification a reminder of the storm I'd unleashed. I didn't listen to the voicemails. I already knew what they'd say. Threats, manipulation, fake tears, and promises she'd never keep the same toxic cocktail she'd been serving for years. Caleb made pancakes while Eli watched cartoons, his small body curled up on our couch like he belonged there. The smell of butter and syrup filled our kitchen, and for a moment, everything felt normal. Eli giggled at something on TV, and Caleb hummed while he cooked. For about an hour, I let myself believe this could work. Then the doorbell rang. It was Sierra's brother Derek, wearing a fancy layer suit that probably cost more than our mortgage. His shoes were polished to a mirror shine, and his smile was sharp as a blade. He handed me an envelope with theatrical formality. "You've been served," he announced. The paper felt heavy in my hands, like lead. I opened it right there on my doorstep, my fingers trembling. A custody petition. An emergency hearing scheduled for next week. The legal language swam before my eyes, but the meaning was crystal clear. Derek smirked. Sierra hired me to get her son back. You don't stand a chance against a real lawyer. Blood is thicker than water, and judges always side with biological mothers. I slammed the door in his face, hard enough to rattle the windows. I spent the rest of the day calling lawyers, my fingers cramping from dialing so many numbers. Most wanted $5,000 just to start. They're smooth. Professional voices turning cold when I mentioned payment plans. We had maybe $2,000 in savings after the ruined honeymoon. Finally, I found a guy named Miles who'd take payments. He sounded young but eager, his voice cracking slightly when he talked about fighting for children's rights. We met that afternoon at a coffee shop downtown while Caleb watched Eli at the park. Miles looked even younger in person, maybe fresh out of law school, with an ill-fitting suit and an earnest expression. His briefcase was new, the leather still stiff. But he listened carefully, taking detailed notes in surprisingly neat handwriting. He said we had a good case but warned me Derek was known for playing dirty. Expect surprises in court, he advised. Things that will make you angry, things that aren't true but sound believable. I asked what kind of surprises. He just shook his head and said to document everything, every text, every call, every interaction. That night, Eli had nightmares that shook the whole house. He kept crying for his mom, then pushing me away when I tried to comfort him, his small fists batting at my hands. It broke my heart into a million pieces. The kid was so confused, caught between loving his mother and knowing she'd left him. In the morning, he apologized for being bad, his voice so small I could barely hear it. His eyes were puffy from crying, and he wouldn't meet my gaze. I told him he wasn't bad, just scared, and that was okay. He asked if Mommy was mad at him, twisting his dinosaur pajama top in his tiny hands. What do you say? How do you explain to a 4-year-old that his mom is a selfish disaster who chose Vegas over him? You don't. You just hug him and make breakfast scrambled eggs with cheese, just how he likes them. The week flew by in a blur of preparation and anxiety. I took time off work, using vacation days I'd been saving for something happier. Miles had me write down everything I could remember about Sierra's parenting. The missed pickups where Eli waited at preschool until the teachers called me. The forgotten birthdays where I'd rushed out to buy cakes and presents so he wouldn't know. His mom forgot the times she'd shown up hammered, stumbling and slurring while Eli hid behind my legs. It filled 12 pages of careful documentation, each incident dated and detailed. Caleb took photos comparing Eli's room at our house versus his room at Sierra's. Ours had books and toys and clean sheets, walls covered in his artwork that we'd framed. Like museum pieces. Hers had a bare mattress, empty beer cans, cigarette burns in the carpet, and windows so dirty you couldn't see through them. We thought we were ready. We weren't even close. The morning of the hearing, I put on my best dress, a navy blue one I'd worn to job interviews, professional but not severe. Caleb wore his only suit, the one from our wedding, now a bit tight. Around the middle, we dropped Eli at my friend Tessa's house, a cheerful place that smelled like fresh cookies and had 3 dogs for him to play with. He clung to me at the door, his fingers twisted in my dress, begging not to go back to Mommy's house. His fear was a living thing radiating from his small body. I promised him everything would be okay, the lie tasting bitter on my tongue. I hoped I wasn't lying. The courthouse was old and intimidating, all marble and dark wood designed to make regular people feel small. Miles met us outside, looking nervous and adjusting his tie repeatedly. He said Derek had filed additional documents, that morning thick manila folders that made my stomach drop.
He wouldn't say what was in them, just told us to stay calm, though.
Matter what, to let him do the talking. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. More like a conference room than the grand halls of justice from TV. It smelled like old paper and floor polish. Sierra sat at the other table, wearing a conservative dress I'd never seen before, probably borrowed. Her hair was neat, pulled back in a modest bun, makeup subtle and maternal. She looked like a different person, like someone had dressed up a Wolf in sheep's clothing. Derek sat beside her in an expensive suit that screamed success and reliability. The judge was an older woman with gray hair pulled back severely and tired eyes that had seen too many family disasters. She read through the papers while we waited, occasionally making notes with a gold pen. The silence was suffocating. Finally, she looked up over her reading glasses and asked Derek to present his case. Derek stood and launched into a speech about a loving mother being denied her child, his voice rich with false sympathy. He painted Sierra as a struggling single mom who'd made one mistake, overwhelmed by the pressures of modern parenthood. He said she'd been exhausted and asked her sister for help, a moment of vulnerability twisted into abandonment. He claimed I'd agreed to babysit for a few days, then refused to return Eli, turning a family favor into a kidnapping. The judge took notes, her expression unreadable. Then Derek dropped the bomb. He submitted documents showing I'd been treated for depression 5 years ago after a bad breakup. He said I was mentally unstable, prone to erratic behavior, unfit to care for a child. The papers made a soft thud as they hit the judge's desk. I felt the blood drain from my face, my hands going cold. How did he even get those records? They were supposed to be confidential. Miles objected immediately, saying the records were irrelevant and obtained through improper channels, his voice rising with indignation. The judge said she'd review them for relevance, but would need to verify their authenticity, adding them to her growing pile of evidence. Derek continued, presenting character statements from 3 of Sierra's friends' women. I recognized as her drinking buddies, all saying what a devoted mother she was, how she lived for Eli, all lies wrapped in legal language, but they sounded convincing, professionally written. Then he called Sierra to testify. She walked to the stand slowly, playing up the grieving mother angle. She cried on cue, talking about how much she missed her baby, how empty her arms felt without him, how I'd always been jealous of her, jealous that she had a child, jealous of her freedom, jealous of everything. She claimed I'd turned Eli against her with lies and bribes. She was good, really good. If I didn't know better, I'd almost believe her myself. Her tears looked real. Her voice cracked at just the right moments. When Miles's turn came, he presented our evidence methodically, the photos, the documentation, the frantic calls to hospitals when Sierra disappeared. He had me testify about finding Eli alone, describing the terror in his eyes. The pyramid of cereal bowls and empty fridge, Eli saying he was being a big boy and taking care of himself, Sierra laughing from Vegas, the sound of slot machines in the background while her son sat hungry and alone. The judge seemed interested but not entirely convinced, tapping her pen thoughtfully. She asked why I hadn't called Child Protective Services immediately when Sierra first started leaving Eli with me so often. I explained that I was trying to help my sister, trying to keep the family together, trying to protect Eli from the system. She nodded, but I could tell it wasn't enough. My explanation sounded weak even to my own ears. Then Miles called his witness, Ramona, the social worker. She testified about finding Eli alone and scared, how he'd been too frightened to open the door at first, about the condition of Sierra's house, the overflowing trash, the empty beer bottles, the lack of food suitable for a child. She detailed Eli saying this wasn't the first time Mommy left him alone, that he knew how to use the microwave and where the cereal was kept. Derek objected repeatedly, claiming hearsay and bias, but Ramona held firm. She'd been doing this for 20 years. She knew neglect when she saw it, and she'd seen plenty. The judge listened carefully, making extensive notes. When Ramona finished, things felt more balanced, but I could see Sierra whispering urgently to Derek, her facade cracking. They had something else planned. Derek stood for his closing argument, straightening his tie like an actor preparing for his big scene. He acknowledged Sierra had made mistakes but said she deserved another chance, that everyone deserved redemption. Then he dropped another bomb. He claimed I'd been giving Eli alcohol, letting him sip beer at family gatherings. He said a neighbor had seen it happen multiple times. I nearly jumped out of my chair, my whole body going rigid with shock. Miles grabbed my arm, his fingers digging in, reminding me to stay calm. The judge asked for evidence, her eyebrows raised skeptically. Derek said the witness was outside, ready to testify. The judge considered for a moment, then allowed it. In walked Sierra's neighbor, an older man named Harold who reeked of cigarette smoke. I recognized him vaguely. He lived 2 houses down from Sierra and always seemed to be watching from his window. He testified that he'd seen me give Eli beer at a barbecue in Sierra's backyard, saying the boy was stumbling around hammered while I laughed. It was complete fiction. We'd never even had a barbecue at Sierra's house. I avoided going there whenever possible. Miles cross-examined him hard, his young voice gaining strength, asking for dates, times, details, what kind of beer, who else was there. Harold fumbled, with his answers contradicting himself, sweating under the fluorescent lights. It was obvious he was lying, but the damage was done. The judge looked concerned, doubt creeping into her expression. She said she needed time to review everything and granted Sierra temporary custody until the next hearing in 2 weeks. I felt my world collapse, the floor seeming to tilt beneath my feet. Miles tried to argue, but the judge had decided. Her gavel came down with finality. Eli would go home with Sierra that day. We had 2 hours to pack his things and drop him off. I spent those 2 hours crying, ugly sobs that shook my whole body. Caleb packed while I held Eli, memorizing the weight of him, the smell of his hair. He kept asking why he had to go, his voice getting smaller with each question. I couldn't give him a real answer. I just kept saying it was only for a little while, the lie burning my throat. When we pulled up to Sierra's house, she was waiting outside, still in her court dress but smoking a cigarette, the maternal facade already crumbling. She flicked it away as we approached, the butt still smoldering on her dead lawn. Eli gripped my hand, his whole body trembling. I knelt down and promised I'd see him soon, told him to be brave, to remember that we loved him.
He nodded, but tears were streaming down his face, leaving clean tracks through the dirt on his cheeks.
Sierra grabbed his hand roughly and yanked him toward the house, her nails digging into his small wrist. She didn't even let him say goodbye to Caleb. As they reached the door, she turned back with a nasty smile, the real Sierra finally showing through. You ought to know not to mess with me, she said, her voice dripping with satisfaction. Then they were gone, the door slamming shut like a prison cell. I sat in the car and sobbed while Caleb rubbed my back. Caleb drove home in silence, his jaw clenched so tight I could hear his teeth grinding. The house felt empty without Eli, like all the air had been sucked out. His coloring books were still on the table, open to a half-finished picture of a rainbow. His favorite stuffed dinosaur lay on the guest bed, one eye missing from too much love. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, just kept replaying the hearing in my head. How had I gone so wrong? How had lies won over truth? 3 days later I drove by Sierra's house just to check. I parked across the street feeling like a stalker but not caring. Her car wasn't there, but I could see Eli in the window, his small face pressed against the glass.
He looked okay, sad but okay, no visible bruises.
I wanted to knock, to hug him, to take him home where he belonged, but I knew that would make things worse and would give Derek more ammunition. I drove away feeling helpless, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. That night Miles called. He'd been investigating Harold's testimony, working late hours for free because he believed in our case. Harold owed Sierra a lot of money gambling debts from her ex-boyfriend's poker games that went back years. We had our leverage, Miles said. He told me to be patient, to trust the system, that things would turn around at the next hearing. I wanted to believe him. A week passed with no word. I texted Sierra asking about Eli, keeping my messages neutral and polite. No response. I called Child Protective Services for updates, and they said the case was progressing, bureaucratic speak for nothing. Caleb tried to keep me distracted, but I was a mess, couldn't focus at work, snapped at everyone, forgot important meetings. My boss gave me a warning and said I needed to get it together. I didn't care about the job. All I cared about was getting Eli back, then everything changed. It was midnight when the doorbell rang, the sound cutting through the quiet house. Like a scream. Caleb grabbed a baseball bat from the closet, thinking it was a burglar, but when I opened the door, there was Eli alone in his pajamas, with a black eye that made my blood run cold. I pulled him inside immediately, scooping him into my arms. He was shivering and crying, his whole body shaking with sobs. His pajamas were dirty and too small, like he'd been wearing them for days. I wrapped him in a blanket while Caleb locked the door, checking the street for any sign of Sierra. When I asked what happened, Eli could barely speak through his tears, his words coming out in hiccups and gasps. Finally, he managed to tell us. Mommy's new friend, Logan, had hit him.
He said he was being too loud watching TV. Sierra had told him to stop crying or Logan would hit him again.
So he'd waited until they were asleep, listening to their snores, and snuck out the back door, walking 8 blocks in the dark to our house, navigating by memory and streetlights. 4 years old. 8 blocks alone in the middle of the night. My hands shook as I examined his eye. It was swollen almost shut, purple and angry. Caleb took photos while I held Eli, evidence captured in harsh kitchen light. We needed evidence, proof that couldn't be denied. I called 911, my voice surprisingly steady. I told them about the assault and that Eli had fled to our house for safety. They sent an officer and an ambulance, sirens cutting through the night. The EMTs checked Eli over with gentle hands, documenting every bruise with clinical precision. There were more than just the eye, finger marks on his arms where someone had grabbed him. A bruise on his back shaped like a boot print, they said. None needed immediate hospital care but recommended we follow up with his pediatrician first thing in the morning. The officer took our statements and photos, his face grim. He said they'd investigate immediately, that crimes against children were top priority. I asked if Eli could stay with us. Given the circumstances, yes, he said, at least until Child Protective Services reviewed the case in the morning. We put Eli back in the guest room. This time, I stayed with him until he fell asleep, sitting on the floor beside his bed. He held my hand so tight it hurt, like he was afraid I'd disappear if he let go. In the morning, I called Miles before Sierra even woke up. He said to document everything and file an emergency custody petition immediately. The black eye changes. Everything, he stressed. Physical abuse is a line no judge can ignore. We spent the morning at his office, filling out paperwork while Eli colored quietly in the corner, flinching whenever someone walked by too fast. It broke my heart to see him so scared, so different from the giggling boy who'd watched cartoons. Just days before, by noon, Sierra had discovered Eli was gone. She called me screaming, her voice so loud I had to hold the phone away from my ear. She said I'd kidnapped him again, that she'd have me arrested for interference with custody. I told her about the black eye, about Logan, and hung up. She called back 20 times in 10 minutes. I didn't answer. Then she showed up at our house with Logan, their car screeching into our driveway. Caleb met them at the door while I kept Eli in the back room, holding him while he shook. I could hear Sierra screaming about her rights, about how we'd pay for this. Logan was yelling too, calling us names I won't repeat, threats that made my skin crawl. Caleb stayed calm, told them to leave or he'd call the police. They didn't leave. Caleb called the police. The same officer from the night before showed up, already familiar with the situation. He recognized Logan immediately, his face hardening. Turns out Logan had a record: assault, substance possession, DUI, domestic violence. The officer told them both to leave and not come back.
He said,
If they tried to take Eli, they'd be arrested for child endangerment. Sierra went ballistic, started throwing things from her purse at our house: lipstick, keys, even her phone, which shattered on the concrete. The officer had enough. He cuffed her for disorderly conduct, the metal clicking with finality. Logan tried to intervene and got cuffed too, shouting about police brutality as they were loaded into the patrol car. Sierra screamed that this wasn't over, that she'd destroy me, ruin my life, take everything I loved. I believed her, but I didn't care. Eli was safe. The emergency hearing was scheduled for 3 days later. Miles said we had a strong case now. Physical abuse documented by professionals, criminal records, the midnight escape that showed Eli's desperation. But he warned me they'd come out swinging. Sure enough, the next day, Derek filed countercharges. He claimed I'd coached Eli to lie about the abuse, Said I'd caused the bruises myself to frame Logan, that I was that desperate to keep Eli. He even alleged I'd planted substances in Sierra's house during previous visits. It was insane, but I knew some judges might consider it. Miles told me not to worry, said Derek was desperate, throwing everything at the wall hoping something would stick, but I was worried. Sierra had already proven she'd lie about anything, and Derek knew how to make lies sound like truth. The night before the hearing, I couldn't sleep. I kept checking on Eli every hour, making sure he was still there. Still safe, still breathing. Caleb tried to reassure me, but I could see he was worried too, the tension in his shoulders. The way he kept checking the locks. We'd already lost once. What if we lost again? What if the judge believed Derek's lies? What if Eli had to go back to that house with Logan? I made myself sick thinking about it, running to the bathroom twice in the morning. I threw up twice more before we even left for court. But I put on my brave face for Eli, told him everything would be okay. I prayed. I was right. This time we were ready for Derek's tricks. Miles had spent days preparing, barely sleeping. He'd interviewed neighbors who'd seen Sierra's neglect, people who'd wondered why Eli was always at our house. He found records of missed doctor appointments, immunizations Eli had almost missed if I hadn't taken him. He even got Logan's ex-girlfriend to write a statement about his violence, about the reason she'd fled with their daughter. We had a solid case, built on facts, not fiction. But when we walked into the courtroom, I saw Sierra's secret weapon, her mother, my mother sitting right behind her, glaring at me with familiar disappointment. I hadn't seen her in 2 years, not since she'd taken Sierra's side in our last fight, choosing her golden child over truth. Now she was here to support the daughter who'd abandoned her grandson. Of course she was. The judge was different this time. A younger man who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, checking his watch repeatedly. He rushed through the preliminaries and asked Derek to present. Derek stood and immediately went on the attack. He said I was a vindictive sister who'd always resented Sierra's motherhood. That I'd manipulated a confused child into telling lies. For attention. He presented affidavits from Sierra and Logan denying any abused notarized lies on official paper. Then he called our mother to testify. She took the stand and lied through her teeth with practiced ease. She said I'd always been unstable, jealous, difficult. She claimed she'd seen me drinking heavily around Eli at family gatherings that never happened. She said Sierra was a wonderful mother who just needed support, not judgment. Every word was a knife in my back, each lie cutting deeper than the last. Miles cross-examined her hard, his youth falling away as he found his courtroom voice. He asked why she hadn't seen Eli in 6 months if Sierra was such a good mother. He asked why she'd never called Child Protective Services if she thought I was drinking around him. He asked why there were no photos of her with Eli from the past year. She fumbled for answers, contradicting herself repeatedly. Her story fell apart, but the damage was done. Our own mother had testified against me. The judge looked troubled, making notes. Then Miles presented our evidence. The photos of Eli's bruises, each one documented and dated, the police reports written in official language that couldn't be disputed, the record of Logan's violence stretching back years. He called the EMT who'd examined Eli. The man testified clearly about the injuries, saying they were consistent with abuse, not accidents. Derek objected repeatedly, but the EMT was a professional. His testimony carried weight that lies couldn't match. Then came the moment I dreaded. Eli had to testify. The judge cleared the courtroom of everyone except essential parties, making it less intimidating. Eli sat in a special chair, clutching his dinosaur, looking so small. The judge asked him gentle questions about what happened. His voice soft and patient. Eli told the truth in the simple, honest way only children can. He said Logan hit him when he spilled juice on the carpet, said Mommy told him not to cry or it would be worse. Said he was scared and ran to Aunt Claire's house because that's where he felt safe. He was so brave, so honest. Even Derek couldn't shake his testimony and couldn't make a 4-year-old sound like a liar. When it was over, Eli ran to me. The judge allowed it, let him sit on my lap for the rest of the hearing, a small kindness that meant everything. Miles's closing argument was passionate. He talked about a little boy who'd been failed by his mother repeatedly, who'd been left alone, neglected, and finally abused, who'd found safety with his aunt and uncle only to be dragged back into danger. He asked the judge to protect Eli and, not enable his abuser, to see through the lies to the truth written in bruises on a child's body. Derek's closing was all emotion and manipulation. He talked about a mother's love and second chances, said foster care statistics prove children did better with biological parents, quoted studies and percentages. It might have worked if Eli hadn't been sitting right there with a black eye. The evidence was impossible to ignore. The judge deliberated for an hour, the longest hour of my life. Eli fell asleep in my arms while we waited, trusting me to keep him safe. Finally, the judge returned. He granted us temporary custody with a clear path to permanent adoption if Sierra didn't comply with requirements. He said Sierra could have supervised visitation only 1 hour a week at a county facility, required her to take parenting classes and undergo psychological evaluation. Logan was banned from any contact with Eli, and a restraining order was to be issued immediately. Sierra exploded, screaming about her rights, about corruption, about me poisoning her son against her. The judge threatened contempt charges, his patience exhausted. Derek managed to calm her down and get her out of the courtroom, practically dragging her. As they left, she shot me a look of pure hatred, the kind that promised this wasn't over. I knew she'd be back. She'd appeal, she'd lie, she'd manipulate. But for now, Eli was safe. He was ours. That's all that mattered. I held him tighter and let myself breathe for the first time in weeks. The drive home from court felt surreal. Eli was officially ours, at least temporarily. He sat in his booster seat, humming some song from a cartoon, like the whole nightmare hadn't happened. Caleb kept glancing at me with a relieved smile. I couldn't stop checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see Sierra's car following. But the road stayed clear. We stopped for ice cream on the way home. Eli got chocolate with sprinkles, and it dripped all over his shirt. He laughed for the first time in days. That sound was worth more than anything. That night, we had a little celebration with just the three of us, pizza and Eli's favorite movie about talking cars. He fell asleep between us on the couch, one hand clutching Caleb's shirt, the other holding mine. We carried him to bed together, tucking him in with extra care. I must have checked on him 10 times that night, each time finding him safe and sound, spread out like a starfish with his dinosaur. The next morning, Miles called with bad news. Sierra had already filed an appeal. Derek was claiming judicial bias and procedural errors, saying the judge rushed the decision without considering all evidence. Miles said not to worry, that appeals rarely worked in these cases, but I could hear the concern in his voice. Derek was good at finding loopholes. We'd won a battle, but the war wasn't over. 2 days later, things got worse. I was at work when my boss, Douglas, called me into his office. He looked uncomfortable and wouldn't meet my eyes.
He said he'd received a call from someone claiming I was under investigation for child abuse.
That I was mentally unstable and
dangerous.
He didn't believe it, but corporate policy required him to place me on administrative leave pending investigation. I knew immediately it was Sierra or Derek, probably both. They were trying to destroy my credibility before the appeal. Caleb found a threatening note on his car that same day, cut out magazine letters like some bad movie. It said we'd regret stealing Eli, that we'd pay for ruining Sierra's life. We took it to the police, but they said without proof it was from Sierra. They couldn't do much, just added it to the file. The officer suggested we get security cameras. We installed them that weekend, covering every angle of our property. The supervised visitation started the next week. I had to drop Eli at the county facility every Saturday. He cried the whole drive there, begging not to go. The supervisor was a nice woman named Monica who'd seen it all. She promised to keep him safe. The visits were only an hour but felt like forever. I'd sit in the parking lot the whole time, watching the clock. When Eli came out, he'd run to me like he'd been gone for days. Sierra used those visits to mess with his head, telling him I was keeping him prisoner, that she was fighting to save him. That soon he'd come home and everything would be better. The supervisor documented everything, but the damage was done. Eli started having nightmares again, wetting the bed, asking if he was bad for not wanting to live with mommy. We got him into therapy with a child psychologist named Dr. Lena. She was amazing with him, using play therapy to help him process everything. 3 weeks after the hearing, our security cameras caught something interesting. Logan sneaking around our house at 2 a.m., trying car doors and checking windows. He was clearly hammered, stumbling and cursing. The footage was crystal clear. We called the police immediately. They arrested him for attempted burglary and violating the restraining order. Turns out he had meth in his pocket too. He was looking at serious jail time. Sierra went ballistic when Logan got arrested, called me screaming that I'd set him up, said I'd planted the substances just like she'd accused me of before. I recorded the whole call, every unhinged word. Miles said it was gold for our case and showed her true colors. She was spiraling without Logan, her muscle and substance connection gone. The next supervised visit, she showed up, high pupils dilated, jaw clenching, talking too fast. Monica documented everything and called it off after 20 minutes. That's when things escalated. I was grocery shopping with Eli when I noticed my car making weird noises. Something felt off with the steering. We made it home, but I called our mechanic friend Marco to check it out. He found the problem immediately. Someone had loosened the lug nuts on my front tire. A few more miles, and the wheel would have come off, could have killed us both. Marco said it looked deliberate, not wear and tear. We filed another police report. Caleb was furious, wanted to confront Sierra directly. I had to physically stop him from driving to her house. We couldn't give her any ammunition for the appeal. Had to play it smart. Miles advised us to hire a private investigator. He said we needed to build an airtight case for permanent custody. The pie was expensive, but Caleb's parents helped. They'd grown to love Eli like their own grandchild. The PI's name was Garrett, a former cop who knew how to dig up dirt legally. Within a week, he had interesting information. Sierra had been collecting disability benefits for Eli, claiming he had severe autism that required constant care. But she'd been pocketing the money instead of getting him therapy, never took him to any appointments. The fraud went back 2 years, thousands of dollars stolen from a program meant to help kids. We also learned about Logan's mechanic friend, a guy named Trent, who'd been seen near our house the night before my car trouble, the same Trent who'd done time for insurance fraud involving staged accidents. The pieces were falling into place. Garrett kept digging while we prepared for the appeal hearing. He was worth every penny, finding things we never could have discovered ourselves. Meanwhile, Eli was thriving despite everything. His bruises healed, and his confidence grew. He made friends at the park, learned to ride a bike with training wheels, and started reading simple books. Every milestone felt like a victory. Caleb taught him to play catch in the backyard. I read him stories every night, doing all the voices until he giggled. We were becoming a real family. The appeal hearing was set for 6 weeks after the original decision. Miles had us prepare even more thoroughly. We had Eli's therapist ready to testify about his progress with us versus his trauma responses to Sierra. We had the supervisor's reports from the disastrous visits. We had the arrest records, the security footage, the mechanic's statement about my sabotaged car. But Derek had tricks too. A week before the hearing, Sierra's neighbor, Ramona, not the social worker, contacted Miles. She said Sierra had approached her about lying in court. Offered her $500 to say she'd seen me giving Eli alcohol. Ramona was a recovering alcoholic who'd worked hard to rebuild her life. She was offended by the offer and wanted to help us. She said she'd testify about Sierra's real parenting, the parties, the men coming and going, the times she'd heard Eli crying alone. Then Garrett hit the jackpot. He found out Sierra had done this before, not with a kid, but with her ex-boyfriend's dog. She claimed he'd abused it to get custody in their breakup, then sold it a week later. The pattern was clear. She used custody as a weapon, not because she actually wanted responsibility. We had the receipts, the testimony from the ex, even the ad where she'd sold the dog. 3 days before the appeal, Derek tried one last dirty trick. He filed a motion claiming I'd been coaching Eli to lie, said he had proof. The proof was a heavily edited audio recording of me talking to Eli about the court, made to sound like I was telling him what to say. But we had the full recording from our security system, showed Derek's version was chopped up and rearranged. Miles filed charges for evidence tampering. The night before the appeal, I couldn't eat, kept running through everything that could go wrong. What if the judge believed Derek's lies? What if they gave Eli back to Sierra? Caleb held me while I cried, promising everything would work out. Eli must have sensed our stress, because he crawled into our bed around midnight. We all slept huddled together, like circling the wagons against danger. The appeal hearing was in a bigger courtroom, more formal, more intimidating. The judge was an older man with kind eyes but a stern expression. He'd clearly reviewed everything thoroughly, asking specific questions about details from months ago. Derek came out swinging but seemed off his game, kept shuffling papers and repeating himself. We found out later he was being investigated by the Bar Association for his evidence tampering. When Garrett testified about the disability fraud, Sierra's face went white. She hadn't known we knew. The judge asked her directly about the benefits. She stammered and looked at Derek, who objected on grounds of relevance. But fraud involving the child was definitely relevant. The judge overruled him and demanded an answer. Sierra tried to lie, but Garrett had documents, check stubs, bank records, forged therapy notes. It was over. Then Ramona testified about Sierra's attempt to bribe her, producing text messages where Sierra offered money for false testimony. The judge's face got darker with every revelation. When Dr. Lena testified about Eli's trauma and recovery, several people in the gallery teared up. She explained how he'd gone from a scared, withdrawn child to a happy, thriving boy, all because he finally felt safe. Derek's closing argument was desperate. He attacked everyone's credibility, claimed conspiracy, even suggested judicial corruption. It was painful to watch. Miles's closing was simple and powerful. He laid out the pattern of abuse, neglect, fraud, and manipulation. He asked the judge to protect Eli from a mother who saw him as a paycheck and a weapon, not a child. The judge didn't need long to decide. He terminated Sierra's parental rights completely, citing the fraud, the bribery attempts, the child endangerment, the false accusations. He said she'd shown a pattern of behavior that made her unfit to parent. He ordered her to pay back the fraudulent benefits and face criminal charges. He approved our petition to adopt Eli officially, even waived the usual waiting periods given the circumstances. We'd won. Really won, permanently. Sierra didn't scream this time, just stared at me with dead eyes while Derek packed up his briefcase. As she walked past our table, she leaned down and whispered that she'd make me pay someday. Security moved her along. Before she could say more, I didn't care about her threats anymore. Eli was safe. That's all that mattered. The adoption was finalized 2 months later, same courthouse but a different feeling entirely. Eli wore a little suit and tie, grinning. The whole time. When the judge declared him officially our son, he jumped into our arms, yelling, I have a real family now. There wasn't a dry eye in the room. Even the bailiff was sniffling. Eli's new life with us blossomed. He started kindergarten, making friends easily, his laughter a constant, joyful sound in our home. Caleb and I officially became his legal parents, a title we cherished more than any other. Sierra did appeal the termination of her parental rights, of course, but her case crumbled. The evidence of her fraud, the police reports of Logan's assault and her own drug use, and Ramona's testimony about the bribery attempt were overwhelming. Derek, facing his own disbarment investigation, couldn't salvage it. The appellate court upheld the lower court's decision, and Sierra's last legal avenue was closed. She continued to send angry, rambling texts for a while, but we blocked her number. Occasionally, she'd try to approach us in public, always quickly deterred by Caleb's firm presence or the quiet word of a store manager. The restraining order against Logan kept him far away. Our lives settled into a peaceful rhythm, filled with school projects, playground adventures, and bedtime stories. Eli thrived, shedding the last remnants of his fear and uncertainty. He called us mom and dad naturally, easily, and it filled our hearts with a love we hadn't known was possible. One evening, as I tucked Eli into bed, he looked up at me, his eyes full of warmth. Mom, he said softly, thank you for being my real mom. I hugged him tight, tears pricking my eyes. Always, sweetie, I whispered. Always. We had lost a honeymoon and a strained sisterly bond, but we had gained a son, a true family, and a peace that was priceless. The fight had been brutal, but Eli's happy, secure smile made every struggle worth it. We were a family, finally complete.